the first mixing console per se was made for Desmond Leslie, this amazing music concrete composer, and the disadvantages of a tube mixer were the high voltages and the cumbersome nature of the whole thing, and customers were starting to ask me for features that could not be accommodated in a tube mixer, just because you needed an awful lot of circuits and you couldn't fit those circuits into a reasonable space. And not to mention the fact that these high voltages for the tubes were lethal. There was the occasion when I was working in the middle of the night with Desmond Leslie, and I'd switched everything off and I was reaching inside the cabinet to do something or other. And he came into the room and switched it on again without my realizing it, and nearly killed me. And all he did was, "Oh, sorry, did you get a shock?" Yeah, not only a shock, but so that was one of the disadvantages, if you like, of tube mixers. But transistors, I was asked by one of the studio owners in London, "Have you ever heard of these transistors?" Yes. Are they any good? Will they ever be any good? Well, I really didn't know, so I had to find out. And I got hold of some transistors. Transistors were made by the people who also made tubes. They realized, I think, that there was going to be a very useful and important addition to their sales line if they could produce what looked to be a very small type of tube. And I put together a transistor amplifier with an output transformer, which of course was very different to the tube output transformer, because it didn't have to cope with these very large voltages on the plates of the tubes. So the line amplifier, which I started to work on, was actually very, very similar to the line amplifiers we use today. Essentially the same circuits, essentially the same kind of components, all somewhat larger and less reliable than they are today, but the same basics. But of course transistors were noisy little beasts. Nobody had ever thought of trying to make them to behave quietly in a circuit. And by noise, I'm talking about the signal-to-noise ratio that you get in an amplifier. If the amplifier produces its own noise, that's bad news. You need to work at it so that it does not produce anything of its own, but it just passes the signal that you want it to pass as faithfully as possible. So I found a transistor which was produced by Texas Instruments. They had a depot only a few miles away from where I was living. And I bought, I think it was about 6 of these transistors with great difficulty. They didn't know me. I was totally unimportant to them in the industry. They'd never heard of me. And it was like trying to squeeze a great favor out of them to get these transistors. What do you want 6 for? Won't one do? So no, I need 6. And then I found that yes, this was a very nice little transistor, and even by present day standards, it was low noise. And these transistors cost in those days £2.10 each, which, bearing in mind that the dollar was about $3.80 to the pound, it was a lot of money for a transistor. And then came the day when I had to build a console with 48 channels. 48 channels. Well, I only wanted 48 of these transistors, because I only could afford to put one of these wonderful transistors in each microphone preamplifier. And I went to Texas Instruments, and they said, "What do you want 48 for? This is ridiculous. Our whole stock is going to be depleted." Anyway, with a lot of argument and discussion, I purchased 48 of these. Well, I think I purchased 50 so that I had 2 spares, and built the first low-noise microphone amplifier, which was using transistors. And the interesting thing was that we now had a means of producing equipment in a much smaller format than before. When you wanted to build an equalizer with a number of stages in it, you could do that much more easily with the transistors. Tubes were just hardly in the running because there would be so many of them required, and the size and the heat that was dissipated was ridiculous.